I never thought that a simple trip to see my son would end up being the coldest exile of my life. Minneapolis Street, Paul Airport, December 22nd, 6:42 p.m. The kind of cold that gets inside your bones. I was standing by baggage claim, watching Carousel 5 drag its slow loop of strangers, suitcases. In one hand, a wrapped wedding gift. In the other, the garment bag with the suit I'd had tailored for this day. His day. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "We already had the wedding yesterday. You can head back." Ethan. I read it twice. Then, a third time. The fluorescent lights above hummed, and the air around me thinned, like someone had opened a hatch and sucked out all the warmth. I didn't sit. I didn't cry. I just stood there, letting the sound of people reuniting crash around me. Mothers hugging sons, kids yelling, "Grandpa," while dragging snow-caked luggage. Meanwhile, I stood invisible in Terminal E, like a mistake someone forgot to claim. Yesterday, they'd moved the wedding up, without telling me. Ethan had looked me dead in the eye on our last call and said, "Don't worry about travel. I'll handle everything." And I, fool that I was, believed that kindness wasn't a curtain hiding something else. The gift box in my hand, an heirloom watch, engraved, felt heavier now. Not just because of what was inside, but because it had nowhere to go. I turned slowly toward the glass doors, snow flurries drifting across the tarmac outside. A man in front of me rushed into the arms of his daughter, and I caught myself wondering how it feels to be expected. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was expelled, like an object that had served its purpose and now belonged outside the circle. I walked to the cab line, every step echoing like boots down a long, empty hallway. My name wasn't forgotten. It was erased. And the silence from Ethan? That was the ink. 2 weeks earlier, I sat in my den, the fire humming low behind the grate, casting long shadows against the oak bookshelves. My chair, worn in all the right places, creaked as I leaned back with the phone pressed to my ear. Ethan's voice was bright, brighter than usual. "Seriously, Dad, let me take care of the flights. You don't need the hassle. We'll book everything for you." I'd raised him to be capable, responsible, thoughtful. So when he offered to make travel plans for his own wedding, I let myself feel proud. "You sure?" I asked. "Of course. Just relax and let us handle it." "You've done enough." Done enough. The phrase struck me just right that night. I smiled, rocked gently, and glanced at the small photo of his mother on the shelf. Elaine would have said, "He's finally stepping up." I nodded to the silence and muttered, "All right, son, I trust you." That trust now felt like a wound, with edges too clean to have come from a stranger. Back then, I didn't see the signs, the clipped responses, the weeks-long gaps between check-ins. The way Madison, his fiancée, always managed to reroute our conversations, like a GPS set to avoid anything resembling closeness. It wasn't until I looked at the itinerary, flight arriving the 22nd at 6:40 p.m., that the math fell into place. They never meant for me to be there. The wedding had always been scheduled before my plane would ever touch the ground. It was deliberate, and I'd thanked him for it. I sat back on the guest bed at the airport hotel that night, the echo of the terminal still in my ears, and pulled up his old texts, kind ones, helpful ones, all with just enough buffer to make me question whether I was reading too much into things. "No rush, Dad. Take your time. We'll fill you in later." Polite, padded, controlled. He'd been building the off-ramp for months, and I'd taken it without realizing it led to nowhere. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. They didn't just change the wedding date, they changed who I was allowed to be. I couldn't sleep that night. The hotel mattress had the give of a sponge and none of the warmth. I laid on top of the covers, staring at the blue glow of my phone. I went back further this time. Years. Birthday messages that never came. A check I sent for his first anniversary, uncashed. When I asked, he said, "Oh, we didn't want to make a big deal." But they never returned it. Just let it expire like my place in their life. I found the family photo from last Thanksgiving, the one Madison posted. Everyone smiling under autumn leaves. I wasn't in it. I had taken the picture. They'd cropped me out. I used to think I was being generous, giving space, letting them figure things out as newlyweds. But this was practiced. A slow, quiet distancing. The kind that doesn't come with slammed doors, just one closed invitation after another. I reread the text from the airport again. "We already had the wedding yesterday. You can head back." That was the final straw. Not the wedding itself, but how ordinary they made the betrayal seem. Like they'd rescheduled a dentist appointment. No apology. No explanation. Just dismissal. I had carried Ethan's feverish body through nights when he couldn't keep food down. Held him steady when he couldn't face his mother's casket. And now, I was just another guest who didn't make the cut. That's when the humiliation set in. Not hot. Cold. It settled under my skin like frost. There's a kind of shame that doesn't scream. It whispers, "You let this happen." I walked to the window. The city blinking below, snow dusting the roof lines. The morning after, I drove home in silence. No music. No news. Just the hum of tires and the quiet thud of my thoughts. I got back before noon. Snowmelt streaked the driveway, the porch light still on from when I left. Habit. Lane always said a home should never greet you in darkness. Inside, I dropped my bag by the door. Didn't unpack. Didn't eat. I walked straight to my office. My hands moved on their own. Muscle memory. The fireproof cabinet sat behind the desk. Black, heavy, and old school. I opened it with the key I never stopped carrying. Inside, the full record of my life's work, trust documents, property deeds, my will, portfolio breakdowns, corporate filings, all of it, clean, updated, and untouched. I slid out the trust file and flipped it open. My name, mine, sat on every line that mattered. No joint signatories, no proxies, no power of attorney. I hadn't been careless. Not with this. A slow breath filled my lungs. The first full one since that text at baggage claim. He thought I'd gone soft. That age made me sentimental, maybe even weak. Madison probably whispered it in his ear. He's tired. He won't fight. But my hands built this foundation, not theirs. And I hadn't handed over a damn thing. I sat back in the chair, let the silence stretch. Snow tapped against the window like a quiet applause. It wasn't anger now, not even pain. It was focus. This wasn't about punishment. This was about clarity. Ethan had drawn the line. And now, he was going to see what happened when I stepped over it, not as a father begging for place, but as the man who still owned the table. I picked up a pen and wrote one word at the top of the legal pad. Control. Not revenge. Not resentment. Control. Because what they didn't know, what they forgot while I played the quiet, grieving dad, is that I don't raise my voice to make a point. I use proof. And everything I needed was already in that cabinet. By 10 a.m. the next morning, I was downtown, stepping into the glass lobby of Schiller and Bloom, LLP. A young man offered me coffee with the usual polished smile. I declined. I wasn't here for comfort. I was here for leverage. Regina Bloom stepped out of the elevator right on time. Same sharp eyes, same no-nonsense walk I remembered from years ago when she handled my business succession plan. Back then I had told her, "Make it airtight. I don't want confusion when I'm gone." She extended her hand, firm and brief. "You look well, Richard." "I look steady," I replied. "That's enough." We stepped into her office. Walnut trim, soft lighting, A view of the skyline behind her desk, the kind of room where truth doesn't raise its voice. It just gets written down and signed in triplicate. She closed the door. "What are we dealing with?" "My son," I said plainly. "He cut me out of his wedding, lied about the date, told me to turn around at the airport." She raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "He thinks I'm sentimental," I continued. "Thinks I'll keep giving, keep forgiving, but he's made it clear I'm not part of the picture anymore." Regina folded her hands. "So what do you want to do?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I want him out of the will." She nodded slowly. "That's straightforward. Clean cut?" "Eventually," I said. "But first I want him to understand why. I want him to see what it feels like to be treated like a problem to be managed, to be politely removed." A small smile ghosted across her face. Not approval, not amusement, just recognition. "Then we do it by the book," she said. "You still have full ownership of the trust?" "Every line." "Good. We'll document intent, create a new trust if needed, and insulate your assets before he even smells change in the air." I nodded. This wasn't about rage. It wasn't even personal anymore. This was about something Ethan had never understood. I don't speak in ultimatums. I file them. We sat in the silence that follows hard decisions. Regina flipped her notepad to a fresh page. "Walk me through what you want. Not the punishment. The objective." I leaned back. "I want 3 things," I said. 1. Ethan, out of the will. Fully. No loopholes, no lingering promises." She nodded. "Done." 2. I want the house, the accounts, the lake property, all locked tight. Ironclad. If I'm gone tomorrow, no one can touch them without going through hell. We'll build a firewall." "And 3, I said, setting my palms flat on the table. "I want him to know exactly why this is happening. I want the lights on when he sees it coming." She stopped writing, looked up. "You don't want to catch him off guard?" "No. That would be too easy for him to dismiss. I want him to have time to squirm, deny, blame someone else. I want him to feel the weight of it before it ever hits the ground." Regina smiled. Not with her mouth. With her eyes. Professional, calm, focused. "I've seen that approach work," she said. "It's cleaner in the end. No drama, just consequences." "Exactly." I slid a folder across the table. Copies of the trust, updated quarterly statements, titles, deeds, notarized records. I knew what she needed before she asked. She skimmed the first few pages. "Still meticulous, I see." "I don't leave my house unlocked," I said. "This is no different." She placed the file beside her legal pad. "We'll move in phases. First, update all designations. Second, draft a full revision of the estate plan with exclusions. Third, invite him to a meeting." I finished. Her eyebrow rose. "With witnesses," I added. "He needs to hear it with his wife beside him, maybe even her parents." "That's bold." "No," I said. "It's overdue." I stood up. She did too. "Thank you, Regina." "My pleasure, Richard. Most men don't come in until it's too late." I buttoned my coat and paused at the door. "Too late," I said, "is his problem now." That afternoon, I sat at my desk with a mug of tea gone cold and a browser window open. If I was going to give Ethan a reason, I needed more than just emotion. I needed evidence. The wedding date was the obvious start. He told me December 23rd. The flight he booked? December 22nd. Landing after dark. But what if it had been a lie even before then? I searched the county clerk's website for event permits. Took a few tries to narrow it down. Then I saw it. A wedding permit for the 21st. Filed in Madison's name. Approved. Stamped. Dated. 3 days before I was even supposed to land. My chest didn't tighten. It didn't sink. It settled. Because now I had proof. Not just that they'd excluded me, but that they'd planned it that way from the beginning. No mix-up. No emergency change. Just a quiet, clinical decision to cut me out and clean up the narrative afterward. I printed the permit and laid it beside the trust documents. One more brick in the wall I was building. The photo of Elaine sat on the corner of the desk. I looked at her the way I used to when I didn't have the right words. I could almost hear her say it. Get it in writing. The sun was already dipping low. The trees outside the window rattled in the wind. I sipped the last of the bitter tea and let the silence grow thicker. Ethan didn't see me as a father anymore. He saw me as an obstacle, a wallet, a formality. Fine. Then I'd stop playing the father too. At least the kind he could manipulate with a well-placed, "Love you, Dad." This was no longer about being invited. This was about making sure he never thought he could get away with it again. And the first breadcrumb was dated, filed, and legally admissible. I didn't sleep much that night, but I didn't waste the hours either. By morning, the dining table was covered in statements. I'd pulled every financial document linked to Ethan, accounts I'd co-signed, funds I'd helped establish, college loans I paid off without fanfare. Every check, every account, every signature, it was all there. Years of quiet generosity. I started with the legacy fund, the one Elaine and I set up when Ethan turned 15. It was meant for his future. Down payment, business seed, maybe even his children's college someday. The ledger caught my eye. $25,000 withdrawn this past September. The destination? A new account. Not in Ethan's name alone, but jointly with Madison's parents, her father and mother, Gerald and Patricia. I sat back in the chair, letting the weight of it land. They didn't just plan a wedding behind my back. They used our money, my wife's legacy, to finance it, and looped in her family as if they had some claim to the spoils. I stared at the transaction, the routing number, the signature line. Ethan's pen, bold and confident, too confident. He thought I'd never check, that I'd keep my head down and my wallet open. I folded the printout, slipped it into the folder marked Trigger Events, and sat quietly for a moment. Sadness came first, not anger. Just the ache of recognizing I had trained him too well. He'd learned how to hide his moves, how to look me in the eye while pulling the rug out from under me. I'd taught him strategy, negotiation, how to see 3 steps ahead, all the tools that had built my business, but he used them against me. That was the part Elaine wouldn't have forgiven. I reached for the old leather notebook I kept by the table, wrote it down, neat and simple. 9/14 minus $25K withdrawal to account linked to in-laws. Confirmed Ethan's signature. Then below it, he thinks I'm done checking. He thinks wrong. The message arrived in the middle of a silent morning, the kind where the house feels like it's listening. I was rinsing out a mug when my phone vibrated on the counter. Ethan, I'm sorry if you felt excluded. It was just simpler this way. No greeting, no explanation. Just a line of detached justification, wrapped in the politeness of corporate apology speak. Simpler, as if skipping your father's presence at your wedding were a scheduling fix. Not a betrayal, just a convenience. I didn't reply, not because I lacked the words, but because some things are clearer when they sit unanswered. He wasn't reaching out to reconnect. He was covering himself, preempting my reaction by reframing the entire situation as a misunderstanding of logistics, rather than what it was, a deliberate erasure. I walked back to the dining room and sat at the table where we'd once filled out his college applications. The same surface where, years earlier, he asked me how compound interest worked and whether he could buy his first car. I remembered those conversations in detail, not because of what was said, but because of the trust behind them. Now he was reducing everything I'd built to a footnote in his life. It was simpler this way. That's what you say about moving a meeting, not about cutting out your father and rerouting his flight like a forgotten package. I printed the message and added it to the folder I'd started compiling. Inside were the wedding permit, the financial transfer receipt, and now, Ethan's own words. Not cruel, not emotional, just cold. Measured. He wanted control of the story. But I'd already taken control of the evidence. I didn't stew. I didn't pace the room or call Regina in a rush. I just poured myself another cup of black coffee, opened the window slightly to let in the morning air, and returned to the documents. Let him think I was quiet because I was defeated. The real reason was simpler. I was building something stronger than outrage, a case. The next layer of truth didn't take long to find. I wasn't hunting for a smoking gun anymore, just the quiet trail left by people who assume no one is looking. I sat at my desk with 2 browser tabs open, each one telling a different version of the same event. On one side, the invoice from a boutique florist in the area near Madison's parents, ordered and paid in full by Ethan 2 days before my scheduled arrival. The note on the receipt was short: delivered a venue for centerpiece setup, wedding 12/21. No ambiguity, no room for denial. On the other tab, a photographer's Instagram post from the same day. A candid shot of Ethan and Madison standing under an arch of white orchids, tagged with the venue's location and time-stamped with the very date I'd still been packing my suit and wrapping their gift. The caption read, "A perfect day for love." Over 60 likes, comments from mutual friends congratulating them, celebrating a moment I wasn't even meant to witness. I downloaded the image, printed the receipt, and added both to the folder now growing thicker with each passing hour. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was structured, documented, layered. Every page added weight to the reality Ethan would have to face, not in anger, but in clarity. What struck me most wasn't the deception itself. It was the ease, the casual nature of it. As if removing me from their lives required no more thought than changing a dinner reservation. They moved with the confidence of people who believed their version would never be questioned. But they forgot what kind of man I am. I didn't need confrontation to assert myself. I didn't need raised voices or slammed doors. What I needed, and now had, was proof. Proof they couldn't edit. Proof that would hold up not just in memory, but in law. The kind of proof that sits quietly on the table when the lies start unraveling. And when that meeting comes, when they try to explain it all away, I'll hand them these pages and let the silence answer for me. The call from Regina came earlier than expected. Her voice, usually calm and deliberate, held an edge I hadn't heard before. Not urgency exactly, but something colder. Calculated. "Richard," she said without preamble, "did you authorize your son to file for power of attorney on your behalf?" The words didn't land all at once. They settled, like dust stirred from a forgotten corner of the room. I stood motionless beside the window, staring out at the empty street, then asked her to repeat herself. "He filed last month," she continued, her voice tightening. "We were doing a sweep of your estate activity and saw the filing come through county records. It's marked with your signature. Except I hadn't signed anything. Not for that. Not ever." She sent over a scanned copy of the document. I opened it the moment it arrived. And there it was. My name, dated, with a signature that looked close enough to pass at a glance, but wrong in every meaningful way. The tail of the "de" curved the wrong direction. The spacing between letters was too tight, too clean. It was a forgery, and not even a particularly good one, just good enough to slide past someone expecting nothing. I didn't sit. I didn't swear. I didn't even reach for the coffee I'd poured an hour earlier. I stood still in the quiet of my home, holding the phone in one hand and the printout in the other. And for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt the ground tilt slightly beneath me. This wasn't just emotional manipulation anymore. This was a legal ambush. And if Regina hadn't caught it, if I hadn't already been tightening the bolts on everything Ethan thought he could inherit, that signature might have been the key to everything. "You're not going to let this slide," Regina said. "No," I replied, voice steady, "but I'm not going to rage about it either." "Good," she said, "because this just shifted from betrayal to fraud." And that was the moment the war changed shape. This wasn't personal anymore, it was criminal. That evening, the house felt quieter than usual, not because of the hour or the snowfall outside, but because something inside me had finally gone still. Not numb, just resolved. I stood in the kitchen, poured myself a bourbon out of habit, and then let it sit untouched on the counter. I hadn't had a drink since Elaine passed. Doctor's orders, heart condition, the usual list of reasons you recite when people ask why the bottle stays sealed. But tonight, the ritual felt necessary, not for drinking, but for remembering who I used to be before silence replaced conversation in this house. The Christmas lights, still strung along the window frame, cast a soft amber hue across the living room. They blinked lazily, out of rhythm, like they'd given up trying to keep time. I took the untouched glass and walked it into the den, setting it on the table beside her photo. The one we took at the lake. That summer the mosquitoes were worse than usual, and she refused to wear bug spray just to prove a point to nature. I sat across from her, not looking at the photo directly, but feeling it there, anchored in the room like always. The fake signature, the rerouted wedding, the stolen money, all of it pulsed in the back of my mind like a siren buried under snow. "I tried, Elaine," I said aloud, my voice the only sound besides the furnace cycling on. God knows I tried. And I had. I had bent so far for Ethan that my spine ached with it. I had said yes when I should have asked questions, nodded when I should have drawn a line. I told myself it was grief, that keeping peace was my way of holding on to what little remained of our family. But it wasn't peace. It was erosion. One compromise at a time, until I was nothing but a fixture to be moved when inconvenient. Outside, the wind had picked up. A branch scraped softly against the siding. I leaned forward, rested my elbows on my knees, and exhaled through my nose. There's a clarity that only comes after you've accepted the loss, and it changes everything that comes next. By the next morning, the haze of doubt had cleared completely. Whatever hesitation still lingered the night before had burned off by daylight. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. Regina had already drafted a revised estate structure that would remove Ethan entirely, reallocate assets into a new trust, and legally solidify every boundary he had so casually tried to erase. But I told her to wait, not to file yet, not until one final move was in place. He needs to be there, I said, when the ground disappears beneath him, not after, not by letter. She understood without argument. By late afternoon, I sat down at my desk, opened a blank email, and began typing. The subject line was plain. Estate review meeting. Attendance required. I kept the tone formal, almost cold. The kind of email sent by people who expect no discussion, only presence. I addressed it to Ethan, Madison, and their attorney, a man I'd never met but who had co-signed a few of their recent real estate inquiries, likely under the illusion that inheritance was guaranteed and imminent. The message was brief. As part of our regular estate planning process, we will be reviewing asset structures, legal assignments, and beneficiary status next Friday at 2 p.m. at Schiller & Bloom. Presence is required for all potential claimants. Legal counsel is encouraged to attend. This meeting will determine future inclusion. No further explanation, no warmth, no invitation to respond. Just a clear line, drawn not with emotion, but with precision. At the bottom of the message, I added one final sentence. Attendance will be considered consent to formal discussion of standing and rights. I clicked send at exactly 4:59 p.m., when inboxes are either closing or catching people off guard. I wanted the message to land with just enough weight to ruin their weekend. Afterwards, I folded the printed draft and placed it on top of the binder Regina had prepared. Everything was in motion now. Every document, every date, every digital trace backed the story I was about to tell. But more importantly, it would back the silence I planned to keep when they tried to spin their own. The boardroom at Schiller and Bloom always had a strange stillness to it, the kind that made you speak in measured tones and read every word before you said it aloud. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, draped in gray winter light, while the polished oak table stretched between us like a neutral battlefield. I arrived 10 minutes early, not out of nervousness, but because punctuality has always been my way of declaring control. Regina was already seated, her notes arranged in perfect lines, her laptop humming quietly. She glanced at me and nodded once. No need for words. Everything was prepared. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened. Ethan walked in first, dressed in a holiday suit, too new to be familiar, too eager to impress. Madison followed, her expression neutral but calculated, like someone preparing to be offended. Their lawyer, a man with a manicured beard and a steel briefcase, closed the door behind them with the smooth assurance of someone who'd come expecting formality, and little more. Ethan offered a tight smile, not sincere, not even performative. It was the smile of someone who believed the room belonged to him. I let it hang in the air without returning it. When they were all seated, Regina opened the meeting with a brief statement. Today's session concerns the current structure of Richard's estate, trust reassignment, and legal clarification of future entitlements. Participation indicates acknowledgement of the discussion's legal weight. No one objected. No one asked for clarification. That was their first mistake. I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the table. "Let's get started," I said. The tone was quiet, controlled, but it shifted the room. Ethan sat straighter. Madison glanced sideways at the lawyer. No one spoke, but the pause that followed told me everything. They had no idea what was coming, but they felt the temperature change. For years, I had walked into rooms like this with contractors, city planners, finance officers, men who thought confidence was a substitute for preparation. And I had dismantled them one clause at a time. Now it was my son's turn to learn what that felt like. Regina began by distributing neatly stapled packets, 4 copies, one for each of them, one she kept for the record. No explanation, just documentation. Her hand didn't tremble, and neither did mine. The first page was the wedding venue permit, dated and time-stamped. Filed 3 days before the wedding, Ethan had claimed was unexpectedly moved. It didn't invite debate, it just sat there. A fact. The second page, the florist invoice. Paid in full by Ethan. Delivery scheduled for the morning of the ceremony. The note, centerpieces for 12/21's event, confirmed what he had denied by omission. The third, a printout of the photographer's Instagram post. A smiling photo of Ethan and Madison, tagged at the venue, dated and geolocated. Below it, hundreds of likes. Dozens of congratulations. All public, all real. The fourth, the bank transfer. $25,000. Moved quietly from the legacy fund into a shared account with Madison's parents. No heads up, no explanation. Just gone. The dates aligned too perfectly to ignore. The fifth and final was the forged power of attorney document. The one that bore my name in a signature, not mine, filed without my consent, and registered at the county office with Ethan's handwriting on the submission line. Regina's pen paused above it, then underlined the date with surgical finality. No one spoke. Ethan's lawyer finally cleared his throat. "Is there an allegation being made here?" "No," Regina said smoothly. "There's a presentation of facts. If any of them are incorrect, now would be the time to speak." Ethan looked down at the pages. His face didn't redden, but his hands stiffened. Madison said nothing but shifted slightly in her chair, The confidence she arrived with starting to fracture under the weight of printed truth. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice dry. "I was trying to protect the estate," he said. "I thought—" "You thought," I interrupted, "that I wouldn't notice. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just filled the space between us with something heavier than anger. Proof. There was no argument. Only the slow, involuntary recognition that control had left their hands long before they sat down at this table. The room didn't erupt. That's not how real power changes hands. It doesn't shout or lurch or demand attention. It simply shifts, like a tide pulling the ground out from beneath you while everything above seems still. Regina closed her folder with quiet precision, then turned slightly toward Ethan. Not confrontational, not dramatic, just deliberate. "Per Mr. Blackwell's updated estate structure," she began, her tone as neutral as if she were reading traffic conditions. "All prior designations listing Ethan Blackwell as a trustee, successor, or beneficiary have been legally voided, effective immediately." She slid a slim, leather-bound folder across the table toward me. The tab on its cover read Asset Reallocation Plan, Final. I opened it slowly, though I'd already read every page. I wasn't looking for surprises. I was looking for silence, and I found it. Ethan said nothing. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably, leafing quickly through the pages, perhaps hoping to find an error in process, a breach of language, anything that could be twisted into a pause. But Regina didn't leave cracks. Madison's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles paling. For the first time she looked not at me but at Ethan, and there was no performance left in her eyes. Only calculation. A quiet appraisal of a man who had clearly overplayed his hand. I signed the bottom of the final page. Not quickly, not for show. Just with the certainty of someone reclaiming what had always been his. Once the pen left the paper, Regina gathered the documents and locked them into her briefcase. "Any further questions can be directed to my office," she said. "But as of now, the matter is settled." The room held its breath for a beat longer, but no one spoke. No arguments. No bargaining. Only the sound of legal authority closing a lid that would not reopen. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. Because victory, when it's earned through restraint and truth, doesn't need celebration. It only needs to be final. The boardroom emptied slowly, not with conversation or argument, but with the sort of quiet that follows a verdict no one can reverse. Madison stood first. She didn't reach for Ethan's hand or look toward me. She just rose, gathered her coat, and walked out without saying a word. The soft thud of the door behind her echoed louder than anything she could have said. Ethan's lawyer stayed seated a moment longer, eyes locked on the documents as if trying to memorize a flaw that wasn't there. Finally, he stood, adjusted his tie with a flick that betrayed nerves, and spoke without looking at either of us. "I can't represent fraud," he said flatly. There was no drama in it, just resignation. He gathered his briefcase and followed Madison out the door, his footsteps steady but a little too quick, like someone eager to exit a sinking room. Ethan remained. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His shoulders slumped slightly, and for the first time, the confidence, the polished, rehearsed charm he always used to maneuver conversations, had vanished completely. I watched him look down at the polished oak table, the same surface where he likely expected to discuss timelines and assets, and maybe negotiate a few concessions. But there were none to offer, nothing left for him to reclaim. The silence had become instructional. Eventually he looked up at me, not defiant, not apologetic, just lost. But I wasn't there to console him. That time had passed long ago, quietly buried under years of small betrayals he didn't think I noticed. And now he knew I had noticed all of them. He opened his mouth like he might try to explain, or plead, or ask for something salvageable. But whatever words he thought might fix the moment disappeared before reaching his throat. His eyes dropped to the table again, and I stood. There was nothing left to say, and even if there had been, nothing left worth hearing. Sometimes the deepest statement you can make is leaving a man alone with the sound of his own decisions. The following Monday, I went to the bank. No dramatics, no explanations, just quiet paperwork and a patient notary who didn't ask unnecessary questions. The process had been arranged in advance. Regina had sent over all necessary documentation. All I needed to do was sign and watch the locks engage. The first change was the legacy fund. Ethan's name was permanently removed from the beneficiary list, and access was frozen pending a full audit of all transactions tied to his login credentials. The $25,000 he diverted had triggered internal compliance reviews now flagged as potentially fraudulent, and once the bank processed the documentation, he wouldn't be able to touch another cent. Next came the trust, no longer shared, no longer exposed to potential claims by anyone carrying my last name without earning it. Every clause that had once generously assumed family meant loyalty was rewritten in exacting language. No ambiguity, no leniency. Afterward, I stood at the notary window while she pressed the official seal onto the new deed for the lake property. Ethan's name, once listed under future succession, was now absent. The final click of the stamp echoed like punctuation at the end of a sentence I should have written years ago. The last step involved the forged power of attorney. Regina had already filed a fraud report with the county. By the time Ethan realized it was being investigated, he'd be dealing with legal questions he wouldn't be able to spin into misunderstandings. Because when someone files a forged document, it's not just betrayal, it's a crime. And now it had a case number. As I left the bank, the cold air felt cleaner, the kind that doesn't sting, but clears your head. None of this had come quickly. None of it had come without cost. But every decision I had made, every document signed, every right reclaimed, had been done deliberately. And while Ethan had counted on emotion, I had chosen process. That was the difference. He acted like nothing would ever change. I ensured everything did. Previously, I finalized all legal removals. Ethan's financial privileges were revoked. The forged signature was under investigation. The snow was falling again that evening, the kind of slow, steady snowfall that softens everything it touches without asking permission. I stood by the front window, watching the flakes gather quietly along the railing, the sidewalk, the mailbox I'd repainted last spring out of sheer habit. Inside the house, the silence no longer pressed against me. It filled the space like insulation, not empty, but settled. On the hallway table sat the wedding gift I never gave them, a vintage timepiece I'd had serviced and polished, its mechanical heart ticking perfectly beneath a glass face. Wrapped months earlier with quiet care, it had made the trip with me to Minneapolis, tucked in my carry-on, its weight heavier than I realized at the time. I picked it up, unwrapped it slowly, and opened the box. Still pristine, still ticking. But it wouldn't go to Ethan now. That gift was meant for a man who respected what was handed down, not someone who believed he was owed it. I placed it gently back inside, closed the lid, and returned it to the drawer in my study. Not out of spite, out of principle. Some things should be saved for those who understand value beyond price. Beside the front door hung a new set of keys, freshly cut. The locks had been changed earlier that week, not for fear of intrusion, but to mark the boundary, clean and final. Not a reaction, a statement. I reached for the ring and held it for a moment, then hung it back on the hook. This house, this life, this quiet. It was mine again. Not in theory, not in memory, in practice. People often say, peace feels like relief. They're wrong. It feels like ownership of your time, your choices, your boundaries. of the silence that once hurt and now heals. I didn't light a fire. I didn't pour a drink. I just walked into the kitchen, made a simple dinner, and sat at the table alone. Not lonely, just no longer surrounded by people who mistook me for a resource. And that, finally, was enough.